180 years before Churban Habayis, Pashto Malchus Harishah Al Yisrael. Shmoinim Shana Ad Shel Churban Habayis, 80 years, Kozu Tumo Al Eretz Ha'amim V'Al Klei Zchuchos. So 80 years before Churban Habayis, that's when they made a gzeiro not to go to Eretz Ha'amim and Klei Zchuchos, which we're not gonna go into right now, but that was the reference. Is 40 years before Habayis, called to Sanhedrin V'Yoshel B'Chanus. They left the Sanhedrin, went to the store. The store is not a store; it's a nickname store. It's a place which is called store. It's called Chanus, which is also an Habayis, as the Torah points out over here. And in this place, they had the Sanhedrin is out of its main location, which is what? It's the main location. It's in Lishkas Agazis. It's not over there. It is in the Chanus. So that's where they left after 40 years. 40 years before Churban Habayis. The Yechezkel with Avchesem with base towards the bottom. Why they left it for 40 years? Because they didn't do Dini Krosos. Similar to Dini Krosos like that, you could tell me they didn't do Dini Krosos. This, if you remember, is a Gemara in Sanhedrin. Yidum and Baba is remembered for good. Why is it remembered? Without him, because we forgot. Why? What do you mean? What do you mean? Forgot. So just learn. We learn Zvachim, we learn Krasas. Do we know Dini Krasas anymore? Why? The Zara was anybody who appoints somebody to be a Rav, or you give smicha, or someone who becomes a Rav, what is it then? He'll be killed. And the city will be destroyed. The Tchum, which means the whole area around the city will be uprooted. Went and sat between two big mountains, between two cities, between the city of Shvarim. He wouldn't belong to anyone. He was outside of both cities. For 5 skenim, he made them, giving them svicha. Who's that? Reb Meir, Reb Yudah, Reb Yossi, Reb Shimon, Reb Elazar ben Shemuel. These are the 5. This, by the way, is a list of the Talmidim of Reb Akiva. So, but in the company, he pointed them to be Rabbanim. Kivan Shikir ben Moivim, the enemies knew about it. Omalam Banai Rutsu. So he told the Talmidim, run. Omalam V'atam Atea Lechol Bayu. Omalam Reini Mutalif Neim Kevin Shein Loivrim. I'm going to be like a stone that doesn't move. They stabbed him in 300 spears. His body looked like a sifter. So that's a terrible story about the Bidur Rabba, but the point is that there was Dini Krosos. He was soymich these Rabbanim, and therefore they were able to judge Dini Krosos. So you see from here that what? The Dini Krosos, they did have after Churban Habayis. Says the Gemara, no, not Dini Krosos, Dini Nefashos. There was no Dini Nefashos. My take on the Chazud and the Fisher, where they see there's so many murderers, they can't they can't judge them. It's too much. So they move from place to place. It needs to be the place in order to be judged in Nefashos. Okay, so this is what Rabbi Yossi said in the time of his ptir, right? Rabbi Yossi said in the time of ptir, in the name of Rabbi Yossi. Now that was what he said. Now the Gemara checked what does it mean the Krosos, but he gave the history of how the things changed towards the Churban Habayis. And the first thing he said was that 180 years before Churban Habayis, Pashto Malchus Harishah B'Yisrael. The Romans took over. As the Gemara, is it only 180 years? That's not exactly the Cheshvan. V'atani Rabbi Yossi b'Rebbe, the son of Rebbe said, Malchus Porus of Habayis, Shloishi v'Arba Shana. The Persians built Beis Hamikdash. How many years did they were still in their kingdom while the Beis Hamikdash is existing? 34 years. Malchus Yavon of Habayis, 180 Shana. Malchus Yavon is 180 years. Malchus Chashmonoi V'nei Abayis 103. Malchus Beis Hardus 103. Right? So that is 133 years of Beis Chashmonoi and 103 years of Beis Hardus. Right? From here from beyond, you know the Cheshbon one is Churban Abayis. Like one's going to give us a little more Cheshbon is based on Churban Abayis. But now you know what the basically the Sheni was a total of 420 years. You have 34 years of Persia. You have the Yevanim 180 years. So 180 plus 34 is 214. Very good. And then you have Beis Chashmonai is 113. And Beis Hardus 13, that's 206. 206 plus 214 is 420. That's the amount of time the basic English exists. Now, what is more about it? The more understands that when Beis Chashmonai came and conquered, they fought the Greeks, that's when the Romans started. Right? So that's what it is. So you melee, so the Yevanim, the Greeks controlled. Came Chashmonai and fought the Greeks and beat them. And they took over. That's when the Romans started. So why are you saying that the Romans pushed Malchus Rishon? Only 180 years. It was 206 years before Churban Abayis when the Romans started. You're missing 26 years. Right? Because they took it together from the Yevanim. The first 26 years, the Jews had autonomy, as they made an agreement. This goes back to what we learned in yesterday's daf. And that's what the Gemara brings a riot. What's the riot? 26 years, it was peace. Not only peace, it was in control. The Jews were in control. So that's why now Malchus Rishon was controlling. But after 26 years, then the Romans took over and caused them really trouble in Tsaris, Malchus Rishon, and that is why it's 180 years. That's the right.
So the 26 years was in the middle of the second Messianic.
Yes. After they beat the Greeks. Right. On Chanukah. So the next Chanukah. Says the one now the following. Oma Bobo. Itaya Tano velo yodo parte kamahavo. Meaning if you have the rule is like this, people don't get mixed up between centuries. Every 100 years people know which 100 years it is, but they do get mixed up between specific years within the century. So if someone has a mistake, he's not sure. What is he not sure about? He's not sure about right, as Rashi says, that is Eino Tei B'Meus, but he doesn't remember how many years is after the Churban. Right? How many years after the Churban is the century? He knows how many hundreds of years. But how many years in decades is after the Churban? Doesn't know. So, L'shayla L'safra Kamata. What's the Safra? The Safra who writes Kitim and Shtars. And he counts for what? For Malchus Yovan. As we're going to see by the Yeshiva tomorrow's daf, Shabbos daf, that the Shtaris goes based on the Greeks. Right? Now, when did the Greeks become Malchus? So we learned before, we just said a second ago, that once basically the Sheni was built, 34 years later, the Greeks started. Right? But that's Rashi, something that the Gemara did not mention here yet, but the Gemara will mention it later, is that the first 6 years that the Greeks took over, it wasn't a full kingdom. They started taking control, but they didn't establish their kingdom until 6 years. It took 6 years for them to become a full-fledged Malchus that controls the world. So really, how many years, what year do we start counting their Malchus? Not 34 years after building Mesa English, but 40 years after being Mesa English, after they had 6 more years. Once you know that, now go on with the Chedron. Yevanim on year number 40, right? I mean, after 40 years of Beis Hamikdash Sheni, of built Beis Hamikdash Sheni, that's when what? That's when the Yevanim became a kingdom. What year is Churban Beis Hamikdash? If you count the hundreds of Beis Hamikdash, we said Beis Hamikdash was nechrav in the year 420 for Beis Hamikdash. So it's the 20th. So the Yevanim is year 40, 4 centuries earlier, but it's year 40, the 4th decade, and the what's it called? The Churban Abayis is in year 20 in the decade of the Churban Hamikdash, 4 centuries later. So how many years are in between? If I'm not talking about the centuries, I ignore the centuries, there's a 20-year gap in between. So if someone knows when is the Yevanim became a Malchus, just add 20 years, just subtract 20 years, and add 20 years, and you're going to know when is the Churban. Let's say the Gemara. What will be? He doesn't know how many years it is. The Shaila is Safir Kamaksiv asked how much is the Sefer writing for the years of the Greek. At 20 years. He's going to find out. How does that work? Right, so the way, if you want to go backwards, right, if the Churban was, really the way the Gemara is saying it, Rashi you could say that the way we said it before, I just can't explain it. If the Bais lived for 420 years, and the Yevanim became a Malchus 40 years after Churban Bais, after being a Bais. So how many years before the Churban did they become, before Churban Bais, they were kingdom? 380. Because 420 is the years of Beis Hamikdash. And they were 380 years before they became a Malchus. Now, that's what Rashi says. So when you start counting the Churban, and you count it 20 years, I just want to read the Chesh of Rashi. נמצא כשהתחיל תנא למנוע את החורבן, ומונה כבר 20 שנה, שלם כלל הספר דד 400. כשהיה הספר האחס, פרט אלה תנא 21. כשהיה הספר איזה שני פרט תנא 30. So in other words, the distance between the time of counting for the Yevanim and the time of Churban Beis Hamikdash comes out to be at 20 years. Right? So, again, let's see this Rashi inside. I think it will be important to see Rashi inside to have a clear understanding. Rashi says, the first wide line in Rashi, L'chumri, Kesha, Klum Schum Cheshboini Yutza Koyde, Sher Minyan HaSoyim Matchil 380 Shonim Koydem HaChurban. Right? They're counting 380 years before. Ketanya Leil, the Yovanot L'Malchus, the Shlosh V'Arba Bin Abayis. He started 34 years to Bin Abayis. Hoysefalem Sheshem had 6 years. Shei Moni Lem, Retchils Minyan, so Rabbi. So he started counting 4 years, I said before. Tainu, Shlosh Shmoim Koydem HaChurban. 380 years before the Churban. If you start counting from the Churban and you count 20 years, Mishlam Klal HaSefer years are Ba'anois. Right? Because the Yevanim is 380 years before the Churban. When you start counting the Churban, so if I count 20 years to the Churban, so how many years is to the Yevanim? 400. Right? Churban Abayis is 380 years before the Churban. So if I'm counting 20 years post the Churban, so that's 400 years from the thing, right? So the cheshbon is, once you get to the 100, you don't get mixed up with it anymore. So if the Sefer says that right now, take the Sefer, ask the Sefer, how many years is Tiyavon? Says, oh, it's 722. Forget about the 700. Forget about 700. What do you have left with 22 years? How many years is the Churban Abayis in decades? Not in centuries. 20 years more. Why? Because when you counted 20, you reached 400. Now you start again with Yevanim. So when Yevanim count another 20, so now, in other words, 20 years brings you to 100. So the difference between Yevanim and Churban Abayis is 20 years. Because year 0 for Yevanim, year 400, year 0 for the Yevanim, that was 20 years of Churban Abayis. So year 20 for the Yevanim is year 40 of the Churban Abayis. Year 40 for the Yevanim, 40 and 40, is year 60. It's always 20 years more. That's the simon. So you look at the Yevanim, just figure out 20 years more. It's more of the idea of the simon is, as Rashi says, like we mentioned before, centuries I know what century it is. I just don't know the exact year. Oh, if you look at the Avodim, add 20 years, you know the year you're in. That's what it says. What's the simon? Here, the pasuk says 20 years by Yaakov Avinu. Itoi Safro. What happens is the opposite. The Sefer was writing the get. He forgot exactly what year of Yevonim it is. Nishayim the Tana Kama Choshiv. She asked the Tana, mean the one who's counting for Mesamim to Shamash it is. You take 20 years less. That's she's going to find the same idea, just the opposite. The Simnoach, Safro, Bitsiro, Tano, Tisvo. The Safro is Bitsiro, which means, what's the Siman? The Safro is very, very careful in every letter, because when we have a Safra Sefer, he wants to make sure there's no extra letter, you have to write a Chaser, Mole. He's writing, so he's very short. And the Tano, meaning one just talks, Tisvo is either Tesefes, or he says at the Sefer, So the point is, I want to remember who's the one who's longer, who's the one I have to add, who I'm subtracting, what I'm adding. I'm subtracting from the Tana to the Safra, and I'm adding from the Safra to the Tana. Meaning, I'm subtracting from the years of Beis Hamikdash to get to Yavan, and I'm adding from the years of Yavan to get to Beis Hamikdash. That's a simple. This is the Gemara we saw in Perek Chilek. The world exists for 6,000 years. 2,000 years, it's just empty. It means empty, there's no Torah. 2,000 years is Torah. 2,000 years is Mashiach. 2,000 years is Mashiach. But saying Shiro, ma'am. In other words, Mashiach could have come in the last 2,000 years, and it means it won't be missing out. Says the Gemara, when do we start counting 2,000 years of Torah? From the Torah until you want to start counting Torah, that's not true. The Gemara understands the Adhashto means the time of the Gemara. You count 2,000 years from the Torah until that time, it was 2,000 years. In other words, if you're going to go and do a cheshbon where we are right now, so you'll see that if you look at the first years, according to the Torah, in other words, if you start doing cheshbonis, you'll see that from the creation of the world until what the Torah was more than 2,000 years. It's 2,000 years plus. That's Rashi mentioned there in Sanhedrin, that you start counting from the time that Avraham Avinu started Megayer, the Anoshim and the Anoshim. How old was he then? 52. What year was Avraham Avinu born? Rashi here is a very long Rashi in the bottom, goes through the Cheshbon, but it's a simple, it's for us today, it's easy, without being too Zionist. The year that Avraham Avinu was born is 1948, Libria Soil. So 1948, add 52 years, he's 52, how much is 1948 plus 52? 2,000. So when Avraham Avinu is 52 years old, that's when we start counting the Matan Torah. That's when we start counting it. So in Elim, he's 52 years old. So you go there. Kama Batzon, how much are missing? Tani Tano, Arba Me'ov, Arba'im, Petami Shamin Havio. The fact that we said that the Tano says that you had 448 years, meaning, right? What does it mean? So he says like this. I mean, for the time, this is the amount of time, that's the 448 years you're mentioning, from the time that Avraham Avinu is 52 until the time of Matan Torah. That's what it is. Now, and then we'll do a cheshbon. You have a meaning over here? Okay, so we'll stop over here and continue right after Mincha session. So, as we just learned, the Gemara telling us that the cheshbon of the 2,000 years of Torah starts in the 52nd year of Avraham Avinu. Avraham Avinu, when he's 52 years old, that's when the 2,000 years start. Rashi goes on to add that according to that cheshbon, he goes on to do the whole cheshbon, comes out that the Churban Abayis, after Churban Abayis, you have 172 years to get to 2,000. So 2,000 years of Torah starts, and Avraham Avinu is 52 years old, and end 172 years after Churban Abayis. That's another. What exactly happened? Rashi doesn't say. It's the. Other words, what to say? It's basically the passage of Rav. Rav is a Tana and Amoira is around that time. So that's the time Rav with Talmud of Rav. But that's what the 2,000 years of Torah end according to what Rashi points out. Something more now the following. Now the Cheshbon, like we similar to Cheshbon before. Well, Papa, Itai Tani, with one line for the end of the test of Daf. Well, Papa, Itami Tai Tana V'Loyod the part to come out. If the Tana doesn't know the details, which details, right? He doesn't know. He wants to know how many years of Yemoisa Mashiach came out. Meaning, after 2,000 years of Torah goes 2,000 years of Yemoisa Mashiach. He wants to figure out how many years you have of Yemoisa Mashiach. Right? So what do? L'shayla l'samer kovakosif. Ask the Safra, what's the Safra? The Sefer. What's the Sefer? How does he count again, as we saw before? He counts based on the cheshbon of the Greeks, the Yevonim. Right? So ask him based on the Yevonim. And they're one. And then add to it 48, and you'll get to the same cheshbon. Why 48? So Rashi does the cheshbon. Let's see that Rashi, it says, the same we saw the Rashi before. Rashi says, Memchet Shona, which is about 6 lines at the bottom of Rashi. 172 years after Churban Abayis, then you start counting the cheshbon of the Tana. Uminyan HaSefer matchil 380 shonim koydem Churban Abayis, right? And now the Sefer is 380 years before the Churban, as we said before. Why? Because Malchus Yevonim started really 34 years after Churban based by Sheni, but the first 6 years you don't count. Haremin HaSefer koydem latano taf kuf nun beis shonim. So how many years is the difference? It's 552. Why? Because you start counting for year number 40 of Beis HaMikdash. How many years you have left is 380. 380, then how many years you have till the end of 2,000 years? We just said the cheshbon was 172. So 172 plus 380, 172 plus 380 is 200. It's 552. Now the same idea Rashi said before. So you are right now the Tano who's counting the Yemoisa Yevonim. He after he counts 48 years of Yemoisa. Sorry, not the Yevonim, not the Tano, not the Safra, the Tano. When the Tano counts 48 years, what happens? Nishlamu klo shel Sefer l'shesh. Because again, the year that the 2,000 years of Torah ends is 552 years from the time the Yevonim started. So 48 years later is what? That's when you end a century. Because you're 552. 552 plus 400 and plus 48, you get the 600. So now it goes on the same cheshbon. So from here on, now I'm just going to count it this way. When the Tano was counting from the end of the 2,000 years, says 49 years, that's year 1 for Yevonim. Why year 1? It's not year 1, it's year 601. But the centuries I don't count, because the centuries I know. I'm counting, I'm trying to figure out the details of the years. So 50 years of after the 2,000 year of Mashiach starts is 2 years for Yom. Not 2 years for Yom, 602 years. But again, the hundreds I don't count. So that's how it's always going to be what? 48 years more. So that's what the Gemara says. Ask the Sefer how much he wrote. Add to it 48 years. He's going to figure out his cheshbon. How do you want to know the simon of 48? When you have tesam with base, here, the number 48 is the cheshbon of the number of cities of Levim that you have. Now, exactly the same thing. If the Sefer is Toyer, he doesn't know exactly the cheshbon of the Yevonim. The Shayla the Tana Kamaktani asked the Tana how much he counted for Yemoisa Mashiach. Minus 48. And you figure out the cheshbon. As Rashi points out, you could have done the other cheshbon. So instead of 48, you could say 52. Because it could be 48 plus or 52 minus. You can go both ways. Right? Because you just want to get to the end of the century. But I want to get to this Simon. Why? As the next sentence of the Gemara, as we said before. Simon of Safra Betzira, Tano Tosfo. The Sefer is always shorter. He's trying to medactic every word, every letter. Because at the Sefer, when he writes a star, everything makes a cheshbon. The Tano is Tosefta means Losha Tosefes, he adds more. So Tano, you want to add, to get from the Safra to the Tano, you have to add 48 years. To get from the Tano to the Safra, you have to subtract 48 years. Another cheshbon. So the one now. Omar Avuna. Pray the Abishu. Hayman de Yodo Kama Shnei B'Shavua Huaymet. He doesn't know what year of Shemitah is it. Try to figure out what year of Shemitah is. Netvei Chado Shoto V'Nichshoiv Klali B'Yoivlei Uprati B'Shvue. He should go and try to get to the Yoivlei. How does that work? So let's see Rashi over here. Netvei Chado Shoto on what? Al Shonim de Michurban V'at Shana Shu Oimid Bo. Add for the years of the Churban to where he wants to get to right now 1 year. Why do you want to add 1 year from the years of the Churban? Because Mehaitam. The Tanyo, he brings the Gemara in Titus. Megal Schus Yom Zakai V'Choivo Liyom Chayov Keshecharov Sabayis B'Yishayim Moitzi Shabbos Soyom Moitzi Shvius Soyso. It was Moitzi Shabbos. It was Moitzi Shvius. What is Moitzi Shvius? The year after Shemitah. So what year was the Churban Abayis? Year 1 of Shemitah. Churban Abayis is the end of year 1 of Shemitah. V'tisha b'av haya v'chem b'shniyah hamashot the Churban atchalto de Shemitah l'medei Avos. That's the year number 1 of Shemitah. U'ma'demonu l'shnei Churban lo'imonu lehi shato be'ad yishay de Churban ela be'ad yishay de kam beiso. That is counted as part of the Binyan Abayis. Who enough of the Rubi Tisha B'av. In other words, year number 1 of Shemitah is the last year of Binyan Abayis. Even though the Churban Abayis happened during the year, but it was towards the end. It was Tisha B'av. Tisha B'av is a little more than a month and a half before the end of the year. So when was Churban Abayis? Year number 1 of Shemitah. So if one start to count the year afterwards, which year I am in? Year 2 of Shemitah. So if I want to make a full Shemitah, what do? I add 1 more year. Add 1 more year. So, and now I know, add 1 more year to the time of the Cheshbon of the Churban, you know you're in year 1 of a Shemitah. And what else? Now, you go Nitfi Chashat, Nisha Kloli B'Yoivli, Upratu B'Shvu. Meaning, if I have 100 years of Churban Abayis, or let's say I have 99 years of Churban Abayis, I add 1 more year, how many years is it? 100. How many Yoivlis I have in 100? 2. So I have 2 Yoivlis over here. Now, Venishko Mimea Trey Venishdo apart. Take 2 years of Yoivil, add it to the Prat. Why? Because we have a big machlek as Rabban and Rabbi Yudo. Is the Yoivil part of, is Yoivil is a separate year, or is the Yoivil one of the years of Shmita? Rabbi Yudo holds that the 49th year is year 1 of Shmita. Is year 1 of Shmita? Is year 1 of Shmita? Or is it year 0? Meaning it's a year that you don't catch Shemitah. The Gemara goes to Shitas of Beauty. Shady point out over here, you see from our Gemara, the halachas like a beauty. The Yovel is not counted as a separate year. So if that's the case, what do? You start counting, if I have 100 years, take 2 years, count them towards the Shemitah. So now I'm telling you, I'm 99 years after the Churban, add 1 year, it's 100 years. 100 years, how many Shemitahs do I have? I have over here 2 cycles of Yovel, which each one is 7 years of Shemitah. So I have 14 Shemitah cycles, plus 2 years because I'm counting the Yovel. I'm right now in year 2 of Shemitah. That's how I get to the Cheshbon. That's what it goes. Finish going to trade, take from 100 years, 2 years of Yovel. Finish the body out to the Prito. Finish Shabbat the Prat Bishvur, do the Cheshbon, how many years you have. In other words, you divide by 7. That's he's going to know what year it is. Right? And then you go, that you have to take 2 years from every Yovel. That's just you have to take 2 years to put into the Cheshbon. Now, there's one Nikud over here, and this is the very, very long traces on the side. The shaila is, we mentioned before that the Churban Abayis was a year. How many years did the Bayis exist? 420. Was the Churban in year 420 or the Churban was a year 421? Meaning, did the Bayis exist 420 years? And then the next year after 420, after 420 years, full 4 years, comes the year after, and that's when Churban Abayis happens? Or it's that year that Churban Abayis is part of the 420. Rashi by us learns that the year of Churban is the 420. Rashi is going to bring it. He brings it in Dumat Simin. He goes into a cheshbon Meseches Erechem. Meseches Erechem is a sugya, a very complicated sugya with the cheshboinus of the Churban. I'm learning my son Erechem to learn Ereches. We're learning through it. It's very, very difficult Gemara. And Taisus goes here, really half of Taisus, to attack Rashi the way in the Gemara in Erechem. But the one thing that we come out with it, the communion between Rashi and Taisus is, what is the year of the Churban? Is the year of the Churban year number 120? Or the year of the Churban is year 121? And many of communion is cheshbon, is how you do the cheshbon, just to know this, that comes out of Rashi and Taisus. Says the Gemara, now one more thing over here. 400 years after Churban Abayis, someone tells you, go buy this field, it's 1,000 dinar, you buy it for one. Very, very cheap. Don't buy it. Why not? It's worthless. Why is it worthless? Is it worthless because there's Kate Segul. Right? Kate Segul. Meaning 400 years after Churban Abayis is a time when Mashiach could come. And you have to don't invest in real estate. Because the Mashiach will come and your real estate will be worthless.
That's like you.
Raisa says 4,231 years of Bris Olam. Take a very expensive field for much less. I'll take it. Don't take. What's the difference? Let's do quickly the cheshbon for us. Just cheshbon. The first mandama says 400 years after Churban Abayis. The second mandama said 4,000 years, 231 years of Bris Olam. What will be the chiluk between them? So Rashi said earlier, how many years after Churban Abayis is 4,000 years? When do you get to year 4,000? 172 years to Churban Abayis. Right? 170 years. So the mandama that says year 400, how many years after 4,000 you're getting to? Take 400 minus 172 and you get to 228. 228. 228, it's 4,228. The other mandama says you do 4,231. So it's 3 years more. That's the Gemara says right away. My benai, class shonim. The mastiso top 5 class shonim. The Bryce is saying 3 years more. Now, it doesn't say what happens then. Why then you're mitzapa legula? Because it's tzipia legula that you're assuming Kate's a gula. The Gemara tells us you should know that this year is the cheshbon is that how many years after the Churban Mashiach is potentially coming? Is it? I mean, after the year 4,000? Year 4,000. Is it 4,028 or 4,031? That was the cheshbon that they did. And now you have to believe Mashiach will come. Don't buy real estate. So this is something very, very hard to understand. Just bring this to the Shiloh. Raise Hashem. Hopefully we'll get back to this a little more biyun that comes out of your Shiloh. What do you mean? You want to tell me that once Tipach who learned Masechet Sanhedrin, Tipach who learned Shebechash v'Kitzur. You don't do Chesh with the kids. That was all right. Don't anybody who's a Chash with the kids, if you want to give us a call. You don't figure out the kids. You're telling me now don't buy real estate after this amount, and we know the Mashiach didn't come then. So it's very tamur. What the Gemara is telling us, won't give me a very specific day we should not buy real estate anymore. But like it's within 3 years. So that's something that needs to be defined more. We'll stop over here. This is a very cheshbon dik Gemara. All the cheshbonis that we have.